All right. Greetings. I hope everybody is well. I wanted to today, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to be exploring the discussion that Jonathan Pageau had with Adam Friended. It's entitled Religion and Materialism. It's on Jonathan's YouTube page, and I believe it's on Adam's as well. And this conversation happened after the Rationality Rules conversation, which I watched as well and felt the frustration that many felt in the comment section, but I felt that it was a very interesting and relevant conversation. And I found this one got a little bit further. This conversation with Adam Friended here, and I really enjoyed it. And I want to explore some of the sticking points as they reach them in the course of the discussion. I'll probably review the first maybe 20 minutes or so. And what's interesting to me is that Jonathan is embodying the code, the rubric that is found in his brother's book, The Language of Creation, by attempting to unite heaven and earth. And he mentions this in a sense when he talks about he is looking for people whose position is as divergent as possible from his, but can also have a potential coming together of the 2 points, right? So he's bringing down, he's lowering spirit, right? He's lowering down his cosmological framework in an attempt to raise up the materialist position, not to make the people and the people that he's talking about become Pageauians, not to convince them of his particular ideology, but to share the frame, this spiritual, ancient cosmological framework that is ubiquitous in almost all of the religions, especially Taoism. Share it with these different types of folks. And what I want to do first is I've been trying to put to words what I have and what the insights I've gotten from reading The Language of Creation and engaging with it over the last, few months or so. And this won't make a lot of sense if you haven't explored the concepts in The Language of Creation, which I would again highly recommend that you go ahead and purchase the book there. So I wrote down some thoughts here. It's entitled Mediating Heaven and Earth, right? The idea is that man is mediator between heaven and earth. That idea is found in Taoism as well, and essentially the same language. Man is the bridge between heaven and earth, between the Shen, which is the spirit, and the Jing, which is the earth, right? So I wrote here, by uniting heaven and earth, love is how the logos manifests itself in the human person. Logos is experienced in man as truth, primarily through understanding, beauty, wondrous joy, and sorrow. So these are the principles, right? Then through the application of these principles, man acts as appropriate mediator between heaven and earth. So naming the animals and doing the Father's work on earth as it is in heaven. Now, again, we should dig in, and we can dig in maybe at another time of what love means in this framework and what logos means, what truth means. But they are all related in that they reflect this coherent way of engaging with the world, engaging with self and other as well. So to move along here, what I've seen here, and I'm just going to comment a little bit of what Jonathan's been doing in his different relationships and discussions on his YouTube channel. And I'm excited to have Jonathan on actually in the next week or so on the Rooster's Crow podcast. I'm super excited to have him on. And I'll be probably sharing that and releasing it in the next 2 weeks or so. I'm also going to be having JP Marceau on. He's the Symbolic World blog editor. A lot of great work he's been doing. His recent publishing of his work on and his thoughts on miracles, I think, do a lot to push this discussion even further. So how I think that Jonathan is bringing down this cosmological framework in these different dimensions of experience and thought. So J.P. Marceau brings this kind of panpsychist flavor and philosophy to the discussion, right? So that the bridge is going between this symbolic world thinking and panpsychism and philosophy. And Neil deGrasse, who I had on as my first guest on the Rooster's Crow, Neil deGrasse is bridging this gap through his relationship with Jonathan, with the kind of alternative indie music scene, and these group of folks that are made up and comprise a lot of social justice warriors, anarchists, atheists, things of that nature. And I think this is an interesting bridge and an interesting connection that is being made there. So John Vervaeke, he's the I think he's from Toronto. He is the cognitive scientist professor. He's got a great series on the meaning crisis, and I think that Jonathan engaging with him is building bridges between kind of the symbolic thinking and the academic, psychological, cognitive science, physicalist worldview. There's been some excellent conversations that have been had there. Rebel Wisdom, right? Jonathan's been on there a few times, and I think this is some of my favorite discussions have happened with Rebel Wisdom, and I think the bridge that's being built there is with the sense making community, the systems thinking community, Daniel Schmachtenberger, Jordan Hall, who I will also be having on actually as well, and the integral crowd. I myself was and have studied integral theory, the work of Ken Wilber, for many, many years. And I think that having the discussion there is kind of bridging that gap as well. And then Paul Vanderklay, he is a pastor. I think he's out of California. And the bridge that's being built there is between the symbolic thinking and this Protestant mainline nominal Christianity. And I'm not saying that Paul is a nominalist or, kind of this, not even superficial, but this mainline Christianity that is very literal and doesn't, explore the depths of the implications of a lot of the stories within Scripture and in this worldview. And then Sargon of Akkad, who is sort of this agnostic but seeking type person, and I think he has a crowd that is in kind of in the similar sense. And Jonathan had a great conversation with him that I think went furthest of all in finding at least common ground to continue this discussion here. And I'm excited about 2021 and what's going to bring in this little part and corner of the internet here. And then I'll bring us here to these last two discussions Jonathan had with Rationality Rules and Adam Friended. And this is the bridge that's being built by between the straight up atheists and the anti-theists, right? Which I think is the biggest stretch. And I think this space was initially opened up by Jordan Peterson, and I think it's continuing to be cultivated through these discussions and these relationships. And it's interesting that there's not really, I don't think there's a goal, or that Jonathan has a goal really to convert anybody to any type of religious worldview. I think he's more or less sharing this information, this fundamental code that is so ingrained in many of our ways of being and institutions, that it's just let's all get on the same page and then we can discuss from there. But I think if you can bring up and it takes some time in exploring these concepts, these symbolic ideas, to get into the worldview so you can have a discussion. And I think that I'm excited to see more of these conversations. And I think that is where I'm most excited to see how this goes here. Again, excited to have Jonathan on in the next week or so. So we're going to dig in here to this conversation with Adam Friended and Jonathan Pageau, and discuss some of the sticking points and maybe do some riffing on that as well. All right, let me share my screen here. And keep in mind this idea of mediating between heaven and earth, and lowering the spirit and raising the flesh. Kind of keep that in the back of your mind here. Oops, hold on one second. Hold on. Sorry, I want to make sure that you have audio when we dig in here. So let's try that again. All right, here. So this is towards the beginning of the conversation. And Jonathan was just talking about his discussion with Rationality Rules And now he's going to introduce this idea of he's trying to extend an olive branch. He's trying to extend an invitation to have a conversation to try to find some commonality here in these ideas.
So it's too bad. I don't know. Like for me, it was like a test. It was like I'm gonna find the person that I feel is kind of the furthest from my position that I could actually talk to, and then try to see if we can understand each other. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it happened, but I'm not totally giving up yet. Let's say.
Well, personal feelings aside, I think he's cultivated an audience of anti-theists. I harp on this distinction all the time because it's so important. He has an audience that wants to believe the world would be a better place without religion. Even the LGBT stuff came in your talk with him. Like a lot of those people who are anti-theists are LGBT activists. They feel religion is dangerous to the LGBT movement, and maybe they have an argument there.
That's an interesting thing that I saw with rationality rules, and I want to get into this. I don't know if we're going to get into it here, of this idea of the church and Christianity not allowing or not sanctioning or not allowing the LGBTQ community within the church, or judging this type of behavior, or whatnot. I think there's a lot to be said there, and I'm not sure that I can appropriately articulate what kind of my position is with regards to this major sticking point. But it's interesting how these atheists and anti-theists actually, that is one of the main conflicts, is this idea of judgment against the LGBTQ community. And I don't see it like that. I mean, I know personally a lot of LGBTQ people. I know some trans people. I have no judgment on them at all. I see them as a brother and a sister and a friend, and I don't judge them on their sexual orientation. And I think, again, it comes down to this identifying primarily with the sexual desire that one is geared towards, and using that to create an identity. I think that is the sticking point. And I think we can think of this in terms of um, the commandment to not have idols, right? It's idolatry if the thing that you're identifying the most is this proclivity to sexual desire. And I think that goes towards not just homosexuality. I think it goes towards, you know, so the church and Christianity, right, has takes issue in a certain way. We're gonna have to unpack what that means with masturbation, with extramarital sex, with pornography, um, with keeping up with the Joneses, right? Don't covet thy neighbor's goods, and then worshiping idols. So the idea is that it's not that the Christianity or Christians are passing judgment on people that give in to their desires, right? It's the idea that we all have passions. We're all sinners. We all miss the mark in terms of our relationship with self and other. And it's homosexuality is not some major uber sin that prohibits that community from engaging in this from engaging in authentic Christianity. At least that's kind of my take on it here. So let's just continue a little bit.
Like I don't necessarily disagree with them. In America, we have this thing, and I'm sure it's the same. You're in Canadian, right? In
Canada.
Canada, I'm sure it's pretty much the same thing. Like if you're LGBT uh, the church has prohibitions on LGBT, then you can leave the church. Like nobody's forcing you to stay there. This isn't Islam or anything like that. Like go enjoy your life without the church. So as long as it's not being forced upon you, I feel like they have less of an argument there. So,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things that I thought we could talk about that would be more interesting is that I feel like I could get past some of the talking past one another that you had with him, because the thing about Steve or Rationality.
Well, just before they go any further, just last comments here on the LGBTQ argument and sticking point. Um, so the idea is you identify with the highest high, the highest ideal. anything lower than that, whether it's money, sex, power, um, reputation, right, is in a sense idolatry. And the reason that the first commandments are about not worshiping idols is not because of a jealous God, which was kind of the understanding from an Old Testament perspective, because the type of people there that were around and their level of consciousness was such that it had to be disclosed as a jealous God. This idea of don't build idols, and we think of idols as sacred cows and whatnot, but it's also our passions and our desires. If we make them our idols, if we make them the arbiters of our identity, that is missing the mark, regardless if it is, again, extramarital sex, pornography, yeah, being jealousy, murder, stealing, right? These are all passions that can be inflamed and can take over the body and the soul, which leads to the disintegration of the body and the relationship with self and other again. So let's continue here.
Rules, whatever he's calling himself these days. You, if that, I'm not sure that he can win that audience over, but he has more of a chance of winning that audience over than either you or I have. And I know that when he was making response videos to Jordan Peterson, they very much saw Jordan Peterson as just like this Bible thumper that was winning people over to Christianity. But the reason Jordan Peterson was winning people over to Christianity, I think, is because he was putting a rationalist scientific spin on Christianity that made it make sense for a lot of people who were scientifically minded atheist types.
Yeah.
So it was just a misunderstanding that Rationality Rules had about Jordan Peterson that a lot of my response videos were trying to explain. And it's funny that you are probably closer to the type of person that he thought Jordan Peterson was than I think Jordan Peterson is.
I'm more like I'm an actual. I go to church. I don't go to church now because of COVID, but like in a normal world, I go to church.
Yes.
And I pray, and I have taken on all the traditional practices of a Christian. Like that's.
Yeah, and I thought this was interesting in the Rationality Rules discussion when it was said that Jonathan was like, "Well, I'm further towards the belief in God idea than Jordan Peterson was." It was an interesting reaction by Rationality Rules, but I think it was an important point because I think people are can see that and say, "Wow, this smart guy that seems to be level-headed and speaks coherently and has fascinating insights. How can this guy believe in God? How can this guy participate in this what is thought to be ancient, superstitious, and even destructive ideology of Christianity?" And I think it pushes the discussion and pushes the understanding to again find common ground.
That's for sure.
Do you think Jordan Peterson, because we have this running bet going with Jordan Peterson, is like, is Jordan Peterson really just an atheist that understands Christianity, but he just doesn't want to say he's an atheist because he loses all his street cred? I believe Jordan Peterson is probably closer to the atheist position.
I think that he's the thing. This is the thing about Jordan, is that Jordan is what you see. There are no two Jordan Petersons, and that's something that is important for people to understand, is that whatever you see of him, none of it is like a show.
Okay, I think interesting distinction here, an interesting point to be made with regards to Jordan Peterson, and that it shows where there is this again sticking point in trying to, from a materials perspective or from this atheist perspective, it's this suspicion and this paranoia and this game theoretic understanding of someone that what's this guy's angle, and and understandably so, right, because of the nature of the world that we live in. And it's hard to conceive of someone that is actually wrestling with these ideas in real time, in front of others, in front of huge crowds, like is genuinely wrestling with these ideas. And I think it comes back to this idea of the appropriate agreement between heaven and earth, which can be thought of in more psychological terms as when one's beliefs match one's actions, right? I think you can tell, and I think a lot of times what people are intuiting and why they vibe with someone like Jordan Peterson is that he is genuinely wrestling with these ideas. So when you encounter someone whose beliefs match their actions, you are attracted to that because it's like you're naturally attracted to this idea and this way of being of being coherent, right? If someone's ideas match their behaviors, if their concepts and what they preach matches their relationships, within the world. And I think what we've seen with Christianity and the church and a lot of scandals that have happened, and this was kind of my perception, is wow. So what they're articulating and what they're preaching, is not how they live their lives. When you think of, the evangelical pastor getting caught having, homosexual relations in the bathroom right after preaching a sermon about the negative aspects of homosexuality, it's understandable why someone would be, extremely questioning of such a thing. But again, it's bridging the gap, right? Bridging the gap between heaven and earth, between beliefs and actions. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And I think that's what's interesting here.
If you see him hesitating on a question, it's because he's hesitating on a question. He's not doing it as a way to play a game. Like I had a conversation. I mean, I haven't talked to him a lot, recently because
of the health
sick
stuff
and everything. But I had a conversation with him maybe about a year and a half ago, where he started talking about Genesis again, and he was just like wrestling with the thing, like wrestling with the story, and then he says, what if these stories really were true? Like, what if they were true? And he was excited about it on the.
So you can kind of hear him saying that. I could kind of picture him having that conversation with Jonathan, and coming, like, having an insight or having insights as to the coherence of these ideas and being like, what if they're true? Imagine if they're true. And that is something that I think is important to consider and engage with. That what if these stories are true? What does that mean? What would someone have to think about the cognitive dissonance that does happen when people really start engaging with these stories as, wow, what if they're true? And it's not. So this is where I think the idea of truth needs to be discussed, and and it needs to be hashed out more, because it's not in the sense as truth as correctness, applying 20th century conceptions of scientific materialistic reductionist truth, but truth as, disclosure, right? Truth as the appropriation of being, to use, Heideggerian terms, which I don't know if it'll help anymore. But truth is the agreement between heaven and earth, right? Truth as in right relationship between the self and the transcendent, between self and other, and between self and world. And that goes back to the quote, or my writings here, or my thoughts of how can we think of this conception of truth. It's not that scientific truth and truth as correctness is not certainly a set of truths, and it is more relative, but it is not wrong when we consider this other, more spiritual, more fundamental idea of truth. And they talked about metaphorical truth and Brett Weinstein's conception of metaphorical truth, but I still think that's still applying 20th 21st century conceptions of truth to this more kind of fundamental level. And I think Heidegger does a great job of talking through and working out how this truth as appropriation, this truth as disclosure, as a truth as aletheia, or as truth as unconcealing, right? So, back to my writings, I wrote, by uniting heaven and earth, love, which is this unifying, unconditional love, is this unifying force, right? Is how the logos, how the truth manifests itself in the human person, right? Because we are born as human beings, but what, from my understanding of the Orthodox and the Christian perspective, is that we become human persons, and we do this by embodying and cultivating this love that was brought to earth from heaven by Christ. Right. So by uniting heaven and earth, love is how the Logos manifests itself in the human person. Logos is experienced in man and in the world as truth, primarily through understanding, right? Standing under heaven and appropriately connecting. So understanding, beauty, wondrous joy, and sorrow. So why sorrow? Because, uh, you know, when Peter was, his spirit was broken in the most profound way on that night where the rooster crowed, and he realized that he denied Christ, he denied the truth, and that simultaneously broke his spirit, but it afforded him the opportunity for repentance. Right. So it's not just these positive qualities of emotions that are disclosed in a truth event, so to speak. Um, but anyways, let's continue here.
On the phone, and I was like, "Are you like really, Jordan?" Like, I was like, "Come on, man!" Like, I thought like from my side, I thought we were past this, But I think he's
And here we're going to have the first real sticking point between him and Adam when he talks about here the difference between a belief in God, or as a belief in God, as God is that which affords the assigning of value, which is this the sort of the presuppositionalist argument, versus the idea of faith, right? Faith, and he's going to say this: the celebration of that which is above you, and a participation in that which is below you. And I think this the gap was not bridged, and I think it's more important that it was not bridged, and to look at to how and why, than to say that this was a failure of either party to connect. Let's listen here.
he's really wrestling with these questions existentially, and so that's what it is. So I think that he's not an atheist, but I think that he doesn't have faith.
So watch, you can tell where the sticking points happen when, so he talks about this kind of profound idea of faith, and Adam, God bless him, just immediately pivots to, I wanted to tell my audience that we're both artists too. And you could see Jonathan's kind of giggle, his reaction. He notices that, he didn't make the connection he was trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say it that way. That is, there's a difference between saying that you believe that God refers to something which has value, let's say something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and faith, which is a celebration of that which is above you and a participation in that story. So those two things are different.
So that is something that I want to talk to Jonathan about, is this idea and this conception here of the difference between a belief in God in terms of the value, which versus the idea of faith, and really get into this symbolic idea and conception of what faith is, and dig into what you mean and how can we understand the celebration of that which is above and the participation of that which is below. Of course, again, it follows this fundamental dichotomy of heaven and earth. And this is something I want to talk with him about, because I used to go to church, a Greek Orthodox church, for when I was younger, but I never really understood what the liturgy was. And, I've been talking with a priest here at my local church, the one I used to go to. Actually, it's been 20 years, and I was making my way back before the pandemic happened here. But I asked them, what is the liturgy? How can I explain this strange singing and chanting and reading of hymns to my wife, who's never been in an Orthodox church in that sense, and even to myself, what is happening in the liturgy? And I feel, my intuition tells me, and listening to Jonathan, is this: you are celebrating through worship. You're lifting your heart, towards the transcendent, and you are being spiritually nourished by encountering and participating in the body of Christ. And then sharing this participation, sharing this spiritual truth with others. It doesn't mean forcing them to believe ideologically all of the tenets of Christianity. It's more like sharing this feeling, this emotion, this way of being that brings joy, that discloses beauty, right? And that ultimately is this Christian conception of truth, at least from where I'm sitting right now.
So do you want to get into your conception of God? First of all, just since we're talking about the rationality rules talk, is there anything that you'd like to say that you felt wasn't said there, or what, after you've had some time to reflect on it, what are some of your afterthoughts?
Well, for sure, I do feel like I wasn't able to communicate what I wanted. And it's been helpful, to be honest. Like, it's been helpful to watch. Paul Vanderklay did a comment on the talk, and I've been reading his comment section and my comment section. And so I think it's going to help me in the end, because, these things are hard to talk about. And so I feel like I wasn't able to communicate one basic thing, which is that I could maybe summarize it this way, which is that I have a cosmological frame.
Mm-hmm.
And this cosmological frame is actually universal. It actually isn't limited to Christianity. Christianity has some key puzzle elements of that cosmological frame, which I think are extremely important. I would say make Christianity, truer than anything else. But the frame itself is the same in Taoism and in Hinduism and in all the religions. Like, it's a basic cosmological frame, and the applications of that pattern are what cause all the rules in terms of morality that I believe in. And so, if you're going to argue against some moral position in the Christian worldview, then you have to be able to tell me what it is. First of all, from which position are you arguing that? Because I know, like, I have a whole pattern that tells me a pattern that is as useful to my moral positions than they are to how I build houses and how you build cities and how you organize government. All of these things come down from this cosmological pattern.
All right, so let's explore a little bit. There was a lot said there, and Jonathan is trying, I think, and doing a great job of bringing down this understanding of this cosmological frame that is not it's not just Christian, right? It's this axial age understanding of being in the world. And I don't think he's saying here that all religions are the same. This isn't some synchronist argument here. And I'd like to dig in when we talk about, how he was saying that, Christianity is the truest, is the highest truth in a sense. And I think I know where he would go, or I'm interested to have that discussion. But he's bringing this cosmological frame down to try to bring it into the conversation. And I think we can think of this, he's trying to develop and mediate an agreement between heaven and earth. And in Taoism, you have the Tao, which could be considered as the of the unspeakable presence of the transcendent, which is also immanent. And the Tao is expressed in the world as day. It's spelled T-E-H. Day can be thought of as the Holy Spirit, which comes down from the transcendent and acts in and through people and the world, right? And we can think of it in the idea of yin and yang, right? So yin and yang, the appropriate way to look at things and to act with people is this fine line between yin and yang, right? And in yin contains within it the seed of yang, and yang contains within it the seed of yin. To bring it down even more towards to like the Jordan Peterson trope of walking the fine line between chaos and order, and even more integrating the feminine and the masculine in self, family, and community, right? So this framework, this rubric, is applicable to several, if not all, dimensions of being in the world, right? Morality on the one hand, right, which most people think about when they think about these frameworks, but also of building houses, of building cities, of governing, right? So imagine if there is, and imagine wrestling with the idea that there is a framework that, if used appropriately, which can be discussed and articulated what appropriately means, you have a way to not only be in the world, but to build houses right? How do you build a house where the primary goal is the agreement between heaven and earth? How do you build a city with the primary goal of the agreement or mediation between heaven and earth? How do you govern? How can you understand government through this principle of the appropriate mediation of heaven and earth? And yeah, I'm still kind of wrestling with these ideas as well. But from a leadership perspective, right? The leader is the head and manifests the meaning, the blueprint, and those that follow, or the people in terms of a country, right? So you have the governors, those that govern, which is reflects the head, heaven, and you have those which are governed, the people. Now the people are enacting the laws that are put forth by those that govern. And how can we tell if this is happening appropriately? Well, if the people are cohering and there is order in the world, and people and the institutions are appropriately functioning, and the schools are appropriately educating children, right? Uh, you can see and you can feel if this is happening appropriately. And there have been times where this has been closer than others, and we can look at our time now, and it's things have become so complicated and corrupt and disjointed that it's more obvious to most that there's something wrong, right? There is a decoherence in the world that has been exaggerated and amplified. And I think that is the impetus of a lot of people coming towards this worldview that probably a year or two ago would not even consider it. So I think this chaos that we're seeing is bringing a higher level of order, or it's attempting to bring a higher level of order into the world and reunite heaven and earth, reunite governing with those that govern. And you see, there's a lot of insidious forces that are trying to, um, one, chop off the head, right? Saying that you don't need hierarchy, you don't need like these anarchist ideas that you don't need someone to lead, you don't need some ideas to lead. What you need is just the people to situate themselves with each other. And then you have the inverse, and you have the elite, like those that are leading. They're saying we don't need the body. We don't need the populace as much, so they can break away and kind of and we're seeing, and we're heading towards this global apartheid that is this hyper decoherence of heaven and earth, of meaning and matter, like you see it with fake news and whatnot. Um, but yeah, anyways, that there's a lot of interesting ways to go from there, and I'm just not sure of them right now. But we'll just keep chugging along here.
There's variety. It's not a totalitarian thing. There's variety. So if you're going to tell me that this moral position of Christianity is wrong, then you have to be able to argue your frame to me, not just this position. And you also have to be able to tell me what is the good you're aiming towards, because I know what the good I'm aiming towards is. Whether I succeed or not, we can argue about the application and say this application doesn't lead to that goal. But if you're going to tell me that it's not good enough and you need something better, you have to tell me what the better is. And I feel like that's the place where we were stuck, where I was saying, if you tell me it's this aspect of Christianity is inadequate, then you have to be able to tell me towards what I need to modify it to. If I'm going to modify it towards what? Is it liberty? Is it equality? Is it what is the value? I'm not sure I could understand what that is. Is it comfort? Is it more people alive and less people dying? What is it? Like, what is the thing you're aiming towards? What is the telos?
Yeah, I think the answer there is, this idea, this presupposition of evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, and evolution as such as this ultimate explicator of being in the world. And yeah, I think he's asking these questions because we can see how highly problematic this idea is, right? Social Darwinism, Darwinism, right? And the question happens here. So Adam asks him, "You believe in evolution, right?" And Jonathan says, "Well, I don't know about believe, because evolution is articulating, or is showing the way in which things change, right, and develop. into different ways, into different beings, different organisms, how they develop and change over time through selection, adaptation. Um, so that's not, it's not that that framework is wrong, but if you're coming from that point, right, going back to the 10 commandments, and don't have, and don't worship any idols, don't have any god above me. Again, if we can understand that as, you have to have this way of looking at the world where the highest ideal, the highest value you have and that you articulate is, um, is the highest transcendent, right? And from there, right, unconditional love, truth, beauty, these are all, a place from where to situate yourself to look at the world. And I think he's asking the question here, tell me where you're coming from and what, framework that you are coming from to criticize Christianity. And I think the answer to that is, a lot of times, is this conception of Christianity in its corrupt form, which is absolutely valid, right? But I think that says more about the human beings than it does about the actual code that structures our existence in the Western world. That, of course, things become corrupt, hierarchies become corrupt. The idea is, do we throw out the baby with the bathwater? Do we get rid of this um, profound code that has structured so much of our lives? Um, and if we do, what's next? We see these threads of communism, socialism, anarchy. So communism is a very attractive ideal. It's a very attractive way of looking at the world because it makes sense on paper. But I think this is one of the main sticking points: is, so what will that be which coheres human beings under the rubric of communism? Right? Like, what is it that gives the collective an identity? It can't be just the redistribution of the material forces of production. We've seen what's happened in the 20th century. So what is this ideal that is going to be um, posited, that is going to be the code from, in terms of communism? um, and until we have the healing of the human heart, which I'm attracted to orthodoxy, because orthodoxy, Orthodox Christianity is a spiritual, is a the church is a spiritual hospital, right? If you heal the human heart, individually and collectively, then something like communism, I think, is possible, but it's not going to be in this kind of materialist, revolutionary conception of what communism is. So liturgy means the work of the people, right? It's very similar to, right, communism is the distribution and the owning of the material forces of production, and just the way that you are in the world, right, is situated within the people. So it's the work of the people. Comrade. These ideas, they're similar, but the main thing that's missing is the profound point that I think is something that we need to keep talking about here.
And so I think that was where to me, at least, it stuck, and we were unable to kind of get past that. But I feel like it's maybe because I didn't articulate enough the idea that I don't care as much about the particular laws and rules that you don't like in Christianity, because the frame is so powerful that I'm willing to even accept some things that I might disagree on in detail, because it's worth to keep this frame and to live inside this story and to participate in these communities. It's worth it to accept a few things that I might even disagree with.
I forgot to mention too that we're both artists, so I think I think we have that in common. But just back on the topic, the arguing against.
Again, that was the point that I thought we were gonna see earlier, right? So there's a sticking point, and what Jonathan said, it was pivoted towards, hey, we're both artists, you know, uh, because it's hard to grok this framework if you're stuck in this materialist, you know, this materialist scientific reductionist place. And again, it's not to criticize that perspective. It's very powerful, um, and useful perspective to have. And you don't have to get rid of that perspective in order to enter into this framework that Jonathan is trying to articulate here. So let's continue a little bit longer.
Against the morality. I think, like, I've hung out with these people enough, and I'm sort of tacitly part of their tribe. I think they would say something to the effect of truth, scientific truth, materialist truth has a higher survival value, just because of, they always want to point to medical advancements and things like that, that go putting all of our eggs in the metaphorical truth basket would be more detrimental to the survival of more people than to focus on scientific truth. So I think that is really their biggest disagreement or argument against your ethical package that I think that they would pull out.
So this is something that has come up with Brett Weinstein as well, which is, so on the one hand, you have this evolutionary thinking and this like basic scientific thinking, which is also bound up in evolutionary thinking. And these two things are strangely bound up together. And so what I hear is, on the one hand, I hear people saying that scientific truth is the highest, it's the most important. And then I hear at the same time, the same people saying we need to break our evolutionary code. We need to move out of our evolutionary code because it's dangerous, because it leads to genocide, because it leads to rape, because it leads to all of these horrible tribalistic things. And so they're saying we need to be able to now transcend our evolutionary impulses. And my question is, again, towards what? Like, where are you standing? Like, if you're not then in the evolutionary camp and you're in another camp, then tell me what's your camp. Well, like, tell me where you are and what you're aiming towards.
What do you think the evolutionary camp is? Because you're a believer in evolution, right? I mean, you're not.
I think evolution happened. I don't know if I believe it.
Okay. What would you,
or believe in it? How about if I don't really believe in it, but I don't mind it.
So maybe we're just talking. I don't want to talk past each other. Like,
yeah, I don't mind.
So
it.
you believe evolution by natural selection is happening today? The origin of species. You believe in that?
Again, we go back to, and I've kind of commented, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to go here. There's this wall between these two conceptions, because the scientific worldview is asking the question of how something works and the relationship between its distinct parts. So again, if you want to try to ascertain from this perspective of why an ending of a movie made you cry, you're not going to go and dissect the television and break it to its components parts to try to find the truth of that moment. You're also not going to look at your neurons and watch, and see the pattern that they're firing and say, oh, it's that pattern, in my brain, and those neurons are what caused, this profound emotion, this upswell of a feeling to happen, right? It's not well, that's 50% of it. It's not located in these material processes. It's located in the relationship between these material processes and this higher symbolic, phenomenological, yet real aspect of reality that has been discarded and effaced. And that is, I think, what's trying to be brought back here into play. Let me see if I can see where I'm at here. All right, we'll go a little bit longer here.
I definitely think that.
Or you think it's true? I guess
very powerful. It's a very powerful process that has been brought to light in the last few centuries.
Believe is a tough term. I think that's a term we're getting hung up on. You think you accept that it's true that evolution is happening, evolution by natural selection.
Yeah, I'll say yes. That's fine.
What is it?
I can say yes. That's okay.
Reproduction, variation, selection, I think, is what you can nail it down to. Okay. This also happens culturally. Do you accept that?
I think so.
Cultural evolution happens through the same process, right? A bunch of people
Similar
think,
process.
let's try something different. Let's all switch our genders and form a commune and see what happens. Maybe this will be a successful cultural adaptation. If it's not successful, if it doesn't reproduce offspring, it dies out, and that cultural mutation dies. Correct? Same way as organisms themselves reproduce and die.
Yeah, well, that has some, even in evolutionary terms, there's a problem, because there's a limited amount of energy you can expound.
Sure,
And
totally.
so most
yes.
evolutionary processes are actually hyper conservative.
Very much so.
Because you have very little energy, and if you start to put all your energy in these experimental forms, then you're going to be dead before you have the time to even know whether or not all these forms you're trying to experiment with were going to be fruitful.
And this is the best argument against the celebrity atheists like Dawkins and Harris and those guys, because like religion has all these costly features to it. Evolution is the best argument that religion is doing something useful evolutionarily, or why would it exist? We're expending all these costly energies, going to church, helping people, meeting other meeting together, forming coalitions, all of that stuff has to be evolutionarily advantageous somehow or
also
other.
Because as religion leaves the public sphere, then the birth rate goes down. So
sure, exactly, that too. So you are probably in agreement with Brett Weinstein that evolution, or that religion, is some sort of extended phenotype, I think is the way that he referred to it in his talk with Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, I see. Again, there's that category error that happens, right? So he says, so evolution ultimately, the goal is this extended phenotype, right? And it's not. It's like, what is the purpose of evolution? What is the goal of evolution? Oh, it's to propagate the species. Well, why? Well, to keep the survival of the fittest, to continue to adapt and the propagation of the species into the future. For what reason? And it's this circular argument. And what's missing there is this thing that's been effaced in the 20th century. And I think for good reason, because I think what has to happen after, we had to go through this postmodern deconstruction phase in order to, up level and get to this higher understanding of this, a more profound conscious experience and understanding of what these fundamental codes are, right? So and this is why I'm attracted to a lot of the, game B type thinking. I think that it's problematic because, again, it's missing this fundamental, this fundamental unity, this fundamental bringing together of the ideas under the highest ideal, right? Until that's articulated appropriately, we're not going to be able to move towards game B, right? Game A is this game theoretic, evolutionary, social Darwinistic way that we participate in and work in family and just being in the world. All right. So what does it mean to be human being? What is our goal here? And I think building family, building trust, cultivating relationships between people, right, under the appropriate understanding of what God is, right? And it's not knowing God completely; it's ultimately a mystery. But I go back to Jonathan talking about this two-step of celebrating that which is above you, and then bringing that celebration into participation into that which is below you, right? And again, we have to contend with these ideas, and we have to wrestle with these ideas. Specifically, right, the idea of God became man, God became man and entered the world, right? Whether or not you think this is scientifically possible or it really happened, the impact that this idea, right, that this event had, we structure our, temporally our understanding of existence by saying, 2000 AD, it's 2020, after Christ. So you have to look that this event, this singularity, had such an impact on the way in which the world has been and is continued to be structured. We have to revisit the idea that what if, what does it mean, and what does it mean to you if you if you take seriously the idea that God became man. So if you just put away your cynicism or your skepticism, you can bring it back, just for a bit, and engage with this idea, and engage with, go to church, right? Participate in these discussions and these communities that are worshiping. Ultimately, I think that's what's missing is worshiping, right? And there's a lot of, it can become very problematic, right? Because you can say, what is the difference between, believing in the Christian God or believing in the Muslimite conception of God, right? And then strapping on a suicide bomb and going and killing a bunch of people in the name of the God that you believe in so fervently, right? So it's not without problems to engage with these ultimate questions of being in the world. But what I'm really attracted to from this kind of symbolic perspective is there is a way to ascertain truth. There is truth in the world. Not all truth is relative. There is relative truth, and it's relegated to the domain of science and materialism, which is not a bad thing. But when we focus specifically and primarily and only on this scientific reductionist materialist perspective, um, and disregard this idea of ultimate truth, right? That's what postmodernism did, you know, uh, you know, disavowing any metaphysics at all. A lot of times for right reason, because the corruption within the corruption within these superstructures, whether it's government, religion, um, or whatnot, right? You see the corruption. It's very obvious. We can see the corruption, and that kind of it's easier to criticize and to critique the superstructure, um, especially now, than it is to authentically engage with that which made the superstructure, applicable and allowed so many to cohere under it for so long, right? So um, ultimately, I'll leave it there. I think that these are what these discussions are bringing up for me, and I'm happy and excited to get involved in the discussion here more in 2021. Again, I have some excellent conversations coming up with people that I respect and appreciate very much, and I hope to, provide value by having these discussions and gain some more understanding myself. So. Thanks for listening, guys. If you're still around at this point, please stay tuned for the uploads of um, the Rooster's Crow podcast coming up here. In my second conversation is with John David Ebert. I have a video discussing him a little bit, and we're going to be talking about some interesting stuff there. And I'm not going into some of the interviews. I will be focused on the background and the history and kind of the being of the person that I'm talking with. It's more of an interview style, but a lot of the other interviews we're just going to be allowing, and whatever comes up, right? We're allowing, not to sound pretentious, but allowing the logos to speak through the relationship, and hopefully finding some common ground and maybe making some progress in this collective discussion that we're having on this in this little quarter of the internet. So thanks for listening, guys. I will see you next time. God bless.